Right, welcome folks. We are excited to see you today for our webinar. Before I turn it over to our moderators, just want to take a moment, introduce myself. My name is Meredith Dixon. I'm an educational program coordinator for KU Hawaii, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm excited to welcome you today. So a couple quick things. We are recording today's session, and the recording will be available on our YouTube channel later this week if you want to catch up and watch it there later. I encourage you as we get started to go ahead and feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us your institution, where you're tuning in from. And throughout the session as well, we welcome questions to come in through the chat. We'll also have some time at the end there for some questions as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator for today. I'll let Allie introduce themselves more fully, but please welcome Allie Gary. Allie is at Oregon State University and is also the current chair for the LGBTQIA+ network.
Thank you for that introduction, Meredith. Hi, folks. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's joining us today, since we have folks from all over. The Global Initiatives and LGBTQIA+ networks are so happy to have you all here for the Global Perspectives on Supporting LGBTQIA+ Students panel. As Meredith mentioned, my name's Allie Gary, and I use she, her pronouns. I am the current LGBTQIA+ network chair and work at Oregon State University as the Apartment Operations Coordinator. So today we actually have three panelists, one of which who shows up as a moderator. So thank you to James for stepping in. We have Ryan Young, the Director of Residential Life at Temple University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We have Kevin Snaggs, Manager for Student Accommodation at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, Trinidad and Tobago, and James Greenwood, the Head of Residential Life at the London School of Economics and Political Science in London. Thank you all for joining us today. So we have a little under an hour together to answer some questions about supporting LGBTQIA+ students globally. So let's jump right in. Our first question is for all of our panelists. So I don't know if folks are going to want to just chime in as they feel inspired to answer. But our first question is, how do residential life professionals at your university actively create an inclusive environment that supports the unique needs and experiences of LGBTQIA+ college students within campus housing?
Do you want us just to unmute? Is that okay, Allie, and just fire away?
I think that's great.
Yeah.
And James, since you unmuted first, you get to go first.
Oops, I shouldn't have done that. So I think that within the UK, I'll talk about the UK wide rather than just London School of Economics. It's probably quite helpful to do it that way. There are many different things within Res Life that we do to best support LGBTQI+ students. A lot of that is done before the students arrive, actually. So when they apply on our processes and application, they can request all different requirements that they might need, and we'll do everything we can to support those students. There are some universities in the UK, it's becoming more popular now, where there's LGBTQI only accommodation or floors or flats. And I was talking to somebody called Chloe, who's on this call actually today from Coventry, another part of the UK where they're exploring this option. So it's becoming much more of a common thing in the UK to have exclusive and safe spaces, not just for LGBTQI plus students, but also maybe communities within that, so trans only spaces and safe spaces. So we do all of that. We also think about our programming. So we think about our activities and our events and how inclusive are they? Do people feel included in those opportunities, or don't they? And a lot of that is talking to our student communities. We're very lucky to have an active LGBTQ+ society, which is what it's called at LSE. They're part of our students' union, and they will do all sorts of programming and events throughout the year, and work in collaboration with halls and that welcome piece. They reach out to me on a regular basis where we share best practice, and they will come in and run those events in our halls. The biggest thing for me is feedback. and we talk both in person. We do focus groups every year with students, but more importantly, data. We're data driven at LSE, so we do a yearly satisfaction survey. About 67% of our students at LSE complete that satisfaction survey in halls, and we're very lucky through some very clever technology and systems behind the scenes to be able to break that down into different protected characteristics. So not just LGBTQ students, but actually the experiences of Black students, students with disabilities, the list goes on. And we're able every year to really analyze that data and look at year on year, are we improving things or aren't we? And actually, are things getting better? And then we break that down by building and residents too, to really identify places where not just, I guess, the soft side of things and the community, but also maybe the hard facilities side. Are they working in the best way they can to support the students? So I could go on and on and on, but I'm not going to steal the thunder because there's much more amazing people on this call. I'm sure I've got some great contributions to add.
I'll jump in. Similar to what James shared, we try to start some of that support at the start of a student's experience with Temple, and being able to answer questions through our processes around what we call experience Temple days or preview days, where students who are coming or interested in Temple are there and take an active participation in those events to be able to address and speak to the offerings and the resources that we have. For those who are not familiar with Temple, we are an urban institution right in North Philadelphia, and we have about 4,500 residents or so on campus, depending on occupancy and all of that. So we're not necessarily a small program, but we're also not the largest program in the country. And I know, having worked at other institutions, there's a lot of variety of ways that these things are handled. And I can really only speak to what my experience has been, and hopefully, I know there are other folks across the country who might have much stronger opportunities and things like that as well that are not represented here, and don't want to take away from them. But we definitely, as I was saying, kind of those preview events starting before they get here to understand. More often than not, we're also helping parents navigate and understanding what it is for their students to be going to a campus, and stepping into an environment where they might not have as much connection or control to some of that experience that they might have had when they were in the K-12 system, or in the early education system, to be able to kind of know that they're sending their student somewhere that does feel safe, that does support and provide resources and things to them. So often we're talking them through what does that mean, and what is the best experience. We've gone back and forth at Temple around, do we create a specific learning community or special population, and designate it as that. I have been on a campus previously that had a specific learning community that was dedicated to it. And then here at Temple, we started out with a handful of gender inclusive rooms. And over the course of the last couple of years since I've been here, we've been able to advocate and successfully double, triple the number of rooms we have. And we, part of that was we started out with only a handful, and they were in our most expensive residence hall. So that already crossed some intersections with diversity and inclusivity and access that were really icky for us of trying to support a student to come in, but also then all of these other things about their experience. And so we've now been able to expand gender inclusive housing to every single community on our campus. It's not full blown. I would love for us to be able to just say housing is housing, and the special populations are a single sex opportunity, or single gender opportunity. But we're slowly getting more and more opportunity for that. And in fact, have now, there was a time where we had to turn away multiple people every year, and now our waiting list, or those that we're taking into GIH, is much smaller. We also have a specific temporary space that we've identified that is a GIH space. So if we need to worry or support a student who is going through an incident or a crisis right there that requires a temporary relocation, that we have a GIH available space, a gender inclusive housing opportunity right there, to be able to move and have some flexibility where that was not the case previously. Like we had to move students to separate rooms. We can house up to 2 students in a temporary space here at Temple. And sometimes that does come with being able to support roommates who want to go with each other. And that has been a great asset. I'll stop talking at that point.
Hi, Ali. Thank you for allowing me to join into this panel. Well, my name is Kevin Snaggs from the University of the West Indies in Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean. Well, first up, the Caribbean is nowhere close to North America or Europe when it comes to LGBTQI rights. And I think I want to put certain things in context. Within the last generation, there's been dramatic changes in attitudes towards gender fluidity, these different rights. And of course, change happens very slowly, as you may understand. At the University of the West Indies, I think the university as a whole has taken a policy that they recently, I'll say recently, in 2018, they introduced their gender policy, which addresses equity among all students as it relates to gender issues. But what I can say though, the actual rollout of that policy has stalled, and it's not quite getting there yet. The laws of Trinidad and Tobago and the wider Caribbean, and I speak really of the English-speaking Caribbean, those countries that were formerly British colonies. A lot of the laws exist since colonial times and have not been updated. So there's no legal basis in which for us to operate. However, at the University of the West Indies, and in particular the halls of residence, we have always had in our mission statement that all students throughout our halls, we promote diversity appreciation. We ensure that there are no forms of bigotry, and it's always and the rights of all individuals are respected. So we start there in terms of our policy. In the last 10 years, we have had to undo certain systems within the halls, which are not necessarily university-led, but when we even have been sort of student-led, that have been against that policy. And I think bit by bit that is happening. In terms of individual policies within the halls, so of course, we do not discriminate in terms of our application process. We ensure that people understand up front, we issue a statement as it relates to diversity and at the start of every year. In our FYE programs, these themes are repeated throughout the programs. In addition to this, I think we try to support students in that we promote campus-wide initiatives. We're 16,000 students on this campus, which is a fairly good size, but it's not a large university. So a lot of the programming that happens throughout the university, the whole sort of piggybacks on that by pushing students in that direction. So within the university, there are communities, student-led communities for LGBTQ students. Our counseling unit runs a safe space every week. So the students are aware of all these programs. In terms of the actual halls, in terms of our setup, we are still very much sex-based. So we have halls which are either female only or male only. Even our mixed halls, the floors or the blocks are separated by sex. I use the word sex to differentiate between male, female in terms of the biological sex. So that's where we are. We are still working there, and I think it's important that I set that context as I proceed with the panel. Thanks a lot.
Thank you all for sharing. You all kind of answered the next question that I was going to ask, so I'm going to skip that one. So this next question is for James and Ryan, I'm going to have you answer first. Can you share some examples of specific programming or initiatives implemented by your department to foster a sense of community and belonging for the LGBTQIA+ students living on your campus?
Sure. To be transparent, because we don't have a specific population, it's not something that is specifically targeted or identified. However, we are a campus that uses a residential curriculum. And so through that process, one of our learning goals is around cultural awareness and identity development for our students. And so over the course of the last couple of years, we've continued to assess our residential curriculum and how we can do that and how we can broaden the opportunity for students to engage in identity development and support. And so through that, we've been able to find opportunities in that programming, both active and passive programming that while they are not specifically targeted to LGBTQIA students, support them in learning who they are, resources and available things like that. I know many campuses in the US focus, especially in October, around like what we used to call my culture is not a costume, and being able to provide information and resources of learning around cultural appropriation and how to engage in conversations during kind of our Halloween period. We identified that that really wasn't as effective in helping students understand who they are and resources in that connection, and have changed that initiative to be a more focused of who I am. And so being able to identify who they are as a human navigating the campus of Temple University and the residence halls, and how they show up in their community, and what portions of their identity they feel are important or maybe are not as open or obvious to share, and how they can feel comfortable with that. And so through that program and initiative, that has kind of helped. I was talking with a colleague earlier this morning sharing about sitting on this panel, and one of the things that kept continually going through my mind is there's a cartoon meme that has gone around, and many of you have probably seen it, where there is someone shoveling the sidewalk of a stairs, and there's a ramp covered in snow, and there's a bunch of people sitting there, and it's like, it would be quicker for all of us to access if the ramp was shoveled first before the stairs, kind of thing. And so in my mind goes to that programming as well. If we're programming to everyone, if we're programming to be able to support the development and understanding of who a person is as an individual, that allows them to explore their identity as an LGBTQIA plus individual, that it allows them to consider their race and ethnicity, their socioeconomic status, and really be able to figure out how that fits into how they show up in the world. And so I would encourage folks in thinking about their programming, yes, there is absolutely appropriate times to target those topics and those individuals. And if you have communities or sections in your hall that allow you to do that more specifically and dive into those things, like at my previous institution, that works. If you're in a situation like mine where you don't necessarily have that targeted group, being able to offer something that allows someone the flexibility to say, you know what, I want to explore this side, is a little more safe, a little more like, okay, I can consider this without having to show up to something that says this is an LGBTQIA plus targeted program in that sense. We, of course, will help promote anything that comes through what we call our ideal office, which is our institutional diversity office, to be able to support programming, to do any of the things that they have, actively participate in their national coming out activities and processes, support their lavender graduations, all of those things through our staff, through promoting, but don't have the specific quite program things dedicated in our current approach.
Ryan, you've probably covered quite a lot of some of the areas that I was going to talk about, quite similar, really. But I think that within the UK, I think we're quite lucky generally within the United Kingdom that, it's a very safe, it feels a fairly safe place to be an LGBTQ person right now. Not perfect, very far from perfect, but actually the UK still falls within the top 10 countries for safety around LGBTQ people, not just students. But we also have some really strong laws, and Kevin, you touched on some of that, but but we have, you know, the Equalities Act that we follow, and every university and every person in the United Kingdom has to follow those really strict legal laws. And if you don't, there's, you know, repercussions in terms of the law outside of the university and being a student. So that really supports us with some of the policies and some of the procedures that we put in place to support students, but also the programming and how we build that connection with students. I think our challenge, if I'm quite honest though, is that LSE is a really diverse institution. We have more than 70% of our students aren't from the UK, they're international students. And when they arrive, there's a bit of an education piece that we need to do there around accepting other people, understanding, doing a bit of research if you need to do that research, to use the right terminology and language, and how, you know, if you're living communally with maybe a flatmate who might be LGBTQ for the first time ever, for some students, that's the first interaction they've ever had in person with somebody else that's not just like them. So that's really important. And we do deal with that, I would say, on a very regular basis in terms of just educating students once they arrive, both at LSE but in the UK, around what is the law and what's okay, and how it's okay to live certain lives within the safety of the UK. I think that there's still a worry though for a lot of our students that it's not just a worry, actually, they're petrified that their family will find out. If, you know, if they want to be themselves, we'll support that and we'll keep them safe, we'll protect their data, we'll do all of those things so that they feel safe. But genuinely, I think a lot of our students still think that, unfortunately, the parents or family or friends back home might find out, you know, their true identity. And a lot of the work that we do is around giving reassurance around that, of the law and the policies that we've got in place to support students. So that's kind of the biggest stuff. More locally, as I said before, we speak to our students' union. We constantly speak to students about what works and what doesn't work and what we could change to make things better. Some of the more recent things that we've done in our halls of residences is that we have got a new consent program that we've launched this year. There's a video which I'll put in the chat after I finish speaking, which has just gone on YouTube today, all about, it's called Let's Talk About Sex at LSE, and it's a really open conversation between students about consent. The video is inclusive. And then behind all of that, there's an online training program that students have to take at LSE. It's compulsory. They can't get their key for their hall unless they've done our consent program. The consent program is very inclusive for not just consent generally, LGBTQ, but also there's a survivors only workshop. There is an LGBTQ only workshop too. So we really tailor our programs to support different community groups. The other thing that we do is we give out free sanitary products to all students across our campus, but also in our halls too. There's dispenser units in every bathroom, gender neutral bathrooms included in that across our buildings. And those products are fully inclusive, LGBTQ, specifically more trans students. And we work with a company who are the leaders in this to make sure that these products are best products for our students. So we've done a lot of work around that. And then the final thing that we've launched quite recently is a role models program. And that's become really popular at LSE, where we've got trained up students, but also staff who are role models, because we all know really that students want to see themselves in our staff and our leaders. And if they see themselves and people in senior roles comfortable in themselves, then that gives them power and it gives them motivation, hopefully, and makes them feel more safe, I think, too, to be themselves and open up if they need that support. So that's some of the stuff that we've done. I'll just share some links if it's helpful in the chat to some of those bits of information.
Great. Thank you both for that. Our next question is for Kevin and Ryan. So Kevin, I'm going to have you answer first. How are your staff trained to be knowledgeable and sensitive to diverse identities within the LGBTQIA+ community? And you can speak about staff as like professional staff, staff as student staff, if those things are different on how they're trained.
Well, I'll speak specifically our student staff, for example, our RAs and our student leaders, because that's something that I control. I do a session in my RA training on diversity, and so we do a lot of we spend a morning doing diversity training, and we specifically look at diversity across also different areas. I have found, and I don't know if other people within my region agree, but young people seem to be a little bit more open and are accepting of diversity than say my generation. I know, for example, my two daughters who are both university age students, they cringe sometimes when we say, when my wife and I say things, you know, and are constantly correcting us, you know. We're from a different generation, and I think it's but I think there's a lot of hope within that younger generation. I mean, this is not a generalization of all young people, because a lot of people have grown up in rural areas. A lot of people have grown up in very religious backgrounds. Trinidad is a very diverse country in terms of religion. You know, so Christianity is not the main religion here. We have Christians, Hindus, Muslims, etc. So it's a very you know, a very religious, conservative society in that respect. But you're finding, especially students from sort of the more urban areas, tend to be a lot more accepting, and I see that in my training. And in my training, I also have students from all over the region. So some of the smaller islands, maybe less so than maybe some of the larger islands. So we really work there, and I think in terms of our staff, you know, sort of one-on-one question, you know, whenever anything comes up, we use it as a learning experience. You know, we sit with them and say, guys, you know, this is how we must behave. You know, we have to accept how people are, etc. So I think that basically answers my question in terms of how we treat with teaching about staff and training.
Similarly, I think we try to provide opportunities throughout our staff training processes, both student staff and professional staff, that touch on topics or allow the opportunity for questions or concerns to be brought forward to talk about. So an example of that is many of the institutions that I know of in the United States do some form of interactive training around being on call. Many people call it behind closed doors or something of that nature. A lot of those scenarios and things are developed around things that happen on campus or traditional scenarios that student staff, we actually do that same version for our professional staff training, and do a behind closed doors for professional staff before they encounter an on-call situation as well. But we intentionally add in scenarios that incorporate LGBTQIA components or pieces to it. So in the roommate conflict, we'll script it that maybe somebody is the roommate conflict is centering around an identity where there is a conservative, more religious person who is feeling uncomfortable that their roommate has now identified as gay. Or in our Title IX situation or sexual assaults type scenario, that it is not a traditional male-female situation, that it might be same-sex, same-gender violence that might be happening, or same partner violence that might happen, that allows them to talk through those a little more, and then gives us the opportunity to ensure that in addition to the regular Title IX resources, here are some additional resources for LGBTQIA students and stuff like that. I think where schools or institutions have an opportunity to engage with folks to do safe zone training, and offering that and encouraging that for all levels of your department is really important. And how you can make sure, and I know I've been on campuses and in departments where some students are like, I don't necessarily want to participate in that. And part of the approach that I've always taken is, we want you to go through the training so you're aware of it, but I would rather not someone be required to be an ally, because that doesn't mean that they're going to be effective in supporting a student. But I do think at least sitting, hearing, and listening, maybe knowing some of the terms and the stuff like that happen is beneficial learning for anyone. But those students who truly feel after going through that they can be an ally are encouraged to then support in, you know, from that show the safe zone placard, etc. Same with our professional staff in doing that and making sure that they know the resources on campus. One of the things that I often tell my students is, and my professional staff, is you don't get to pick and choose which incidents or support you offer to a student. You never know what is going to come to you. So even if it's not something that you personally are comfortable with or know, you have to be able to understand and connect folks to the appropriate resources or the appropriate person. And so trying to train them on, you don't necessarily have to handle everything. Here's how you do that. Here's how you can still be supportive, how you can still make that individual feel heard and safe and know that they're going in the right place instead of turning kind of your back on them, if you will, and making them feel like they brought something forward and now they're at a standstill because they don't know what's next, because they're not given that next step appropriately.
Thank you. This next question is for all of our panelists. Are there specific resources or support networks in place for transgender, non-binary, gender non-conforming, etc. students within your department?
I don't mind kicking off again. So again, I think we are quite lucky at LSE because we have a whole department which is gender studies. At LSE, it's the biggest gender studies department in Europe in terms of the study academically around the area. So within the school, I think we're quite lucky that that department give us lots of advice, guidance, and also they're leading the way in terms of the research around gender studies. That helps us. They inform, UK government and wider. The other thing that we fall on is the Gender Recognition Act within the UK, which every company, organisation, person has to follow, which really helps us with our support that's in place for our students. And some of that is very much tailored around trans students, non-binary students. So we have training for staff around how to best support students, how to best use pronouns and language, terminology. We work outside of LSE2 with lots of different charities. There's a number of charities who are absolute experts in supporting certain students. So we'll get those charities in to do talks. They'll come and co-deliver training with us. And then the other thing that I always try to make sure is that all of our teams represent our student body as much as possible. So when we do things like our RA recruitment, we will make sure that that's done in a way that's really inclusive. So interview panels are diverse interview panels, which naturally will encourage more people from more diverse backgrounds to come and work with us. And through that, a number of RAs this year do identify as trans or non-binary, and they've become our kind of role models across what we do, but also kind of our buddies too for students that need that one-on-one support. Lived experience support too, within boundaries, and making sure that they're okay taking some of that on, because it can be quite heavy sometimes. But that's worked quite well for us in terms of the support that's available. There's a number of different student networks which we get involved with, and we also have been able to employ specialist counsellors too. So we have a wellbeing service in the school, and a wellbeing team in the halls, and we've been able to employ specialist mental health counselling specialists and therapists with LGBTQ backgrounds too, that can provide much more tailored support to a student in crisis. So yeah, that's just kind of a sample, I guess, of some of the things that we do at LSE.
I'm happy to go next. I'm glad James raised about the Department of Gender Affairs. We also have an Institute of Gender Studies on our university campus, and in fact, a lot of the changes that have existed within the university has come out of that institute. I also look back at my former deputy principal, who I reported to directly, who was professor of gender studies and one of the sort of leading voices in the Caribbean and throughout the world, and I think having her as a champion sort of opened, really pushed things forward in terms of where we are at right now. Resources, I come back to our resources. So for example, one of the recently in 2018, 2019, UE Pride, which is a student body, was formed. There's an on-campus student group, a recognized student group as part of our Guild of Students. They're fairly active. Of course, things slowed down during COVID, but they're back up. The Safe Spaces, which has been running Safe Spaces every week by our counseling unit, which has been running since 2013. It's another resource for students. Still a long way to go. I think while a lot of people accept sexual orientations on campus, there's still sort of fear about openly displaying your sexuality, especially online, probably in terms of cross-dressing or along those lines. But as I said, it's a slow process, and we're working towards it. We're getting there. I think what is important is that you have to have a champion within the senior management of the university. We lost ours, and hopefully somebody else will step up to the post and be that champion.
I think, some of the pieces I've already touched on of like expanding our opportunities for students, but also through the university have been able to help advocate and see over the course of the last couple of years, things like our we call it Banner, like our student system that allows students to input their preferred name or name their pronouns, so that way when we're looking and we pull in our housing management system, we're addressing students correctly with what they have asked us to share, and being able to do that. And so have tried to also then train our staff to, when pulling reports, using the preferred name category, not necessarily the legal name. All of that. We've also, I've seen a number of institutions also offer an opportunity that allow students to follow in similar steps of many kind of government issued identification in the US, of having either a not NA or an X or something other than a male or female gender marker, being able to do that and offering that and seeing that support students in those areas as well. Not too many specific within our realm of res life, but trying to capitalize on what the school has available to us to be able to do that and support them. I think again, one of the other resources that we capitalize on from the campus is we have a list of gender inclusive restrooms across campus to be able to provide. And so making sure students are aware of where those things are within our own residential students and buildings, but also across campus if they don't happen to be in the residence halls. I also want to link that to not only our students, some of those folks who identify as trans or non-binary, but our staff also do as well. So being able to extend that to those individuals is helpful. I actually try to encourage and incorporate that into my recruitment processes when I invite candidates to campus. There's a set of material that I share with them ahead of time, regardless of what they have shared with me, of when you come to campus, here are resources that might help you feel more comfortable getting to know the environment, and providing things like the gender inclusive restrooms for the individuals who may be nursing, being able to provide where those stations are on campus or private spaces to be able to do that, safety reporting, those things. So that way there's stuff that we anticipate or think that our staff may already know, and that we tend to just announce to our students, but I try to make sure that we provide those same resources and knowledge to our staff as well as to candidates who are coming in, so that way they know where those things are, instead of making them try to do some of that digging and figuring out how they might feel comfortable when they come to our community.
Thank you. That's a really great practice to make folks feel welcome when they're coming to campus. So I applaud you for working hard to do that. The next question, you all have kind of touched on this a little bit throughout some of the other questions, but I'm going to open the floor up in case there's additional things that you wanted to add. How does the collaboration between residential life professionals and LGBTQIA+ student organizations enhance the overall support for LGBTQIA+ individuals, and what initiatives are in place to strengthen this partnership?
don't mind kicking off again. I think that, you know, it's vital. We've got to talk to students, haven't we? We've got to keep that conversation going. And we've already talked on, Kevin, you were saying about the generational difference there. And I think I feel like personally I'm in the middle of that now, getting more towards the older side, unfortunately. And so, you know, things change, don't they, all the time, and that's good. Positive, you know, change is positive, but it's important for us to keep up to date with changes and keep refreshing ourselves, challenging, you know, getting students to challenge us too. So we work really closely with our students union and our LGBTQ society to try and put in various things where we do fully collaborative projects. Some of the things I'm trying to think out loud of what we've done recently this year. So our society do a welcome talk actually for LGBTQ students. So before they even arrive at the university or in their hall of residence, they can join an online webinar, which is a safe space pre-arrival to kind of answer as many questions as we can. They asked me to join that call as a representative from housing, and I'm happy to do that every year and talk to, there's quite a large number of students that join that call, to really make that transition from maybe their home country to the UK or from their home to their new home, you know, as easy as possible and as comfortable as possible. So we do those welcome talks, and we also at LSE give every student, a lot of universities do this in the UK, a mini welcome pack in their room when they arrive, which has got various goodies in it and information, usually in a nice canvas bag. This year we've put in leaflets from our LGBTQ society in every single hall welcome pack, so it goes in the room. We try and be as sustainable as possible, but sometimes a small flyer or leaflet does work. So we put in a small flyer from the LGBTQ society. So every single student will get that in their room, and there's contact details there if they want to join the society and actually maybe find a buddy, for example. So that's made a big impact, I think, to a lot of students this year, having that support there. And then outside of that, in the UK, there's a charity called Student Minds, who are one of the biggest mental health charities in the UK. They are amazing, and some of the work they do around supporting LGBTQ students is just incredible. And again, I'll share a link because they've got a whole resources page there where there's lots of different tips and information guides and guidance and advice of things both in the UK but also wider too. So we work with Student Minds quite a lot for them to do some of our training and guidance and more specialist support when we need it one-on-one for certain students. Yeah, thank you.
As I kind of mentioned before, our primary connections are through things such as our the National Coming Out Week activities and supporting and being present at those. We have individual staff members who volunteer additional time to connect with that. I know our campus during that, what the National Coming Out Week activities is like when we host an annual drag show that a lot of our staff will promote and connect to. Other campuses may do that at various times of the year and be able to support and have that. But that, you know, I think making sure that when those activities happen, our staff are aware of those and are encouraged to participate and build those connections. I think I can't remember which of my colleagues shared, but also when students see that themselves represented in the administration and the staff, like, is helpful. And so being able to, and not everybody is in a privileged space to be able to potentially be out or do that, but when folks can be, to know and share like who they are and see that represented in university administration and housing and being able to kind of see themselves in that different part. And especially when there's opportunities for identities that may not be as well represented or well understood. You know, I am in a non-traditional relationship and have two partners, and students will often, I am now, you know, I'm much more comfortable than I was a couple of years ago in that identity. And now being able to say that, I've had students come up and be like, I've never had anyone say that, and I have a question, and what does that mean? And sometimes those connections, even in a small group, or being an advisor for that student organization, or just showing up and attending an event, can help spark those connections that really support the collaboration. And you never know where that could lead. So that's one of the things that I try to promote with that as well.
Ryan, I just wanted to come in on one of the points you raised there about identifying the support and being open as a staff member. And I've always tried to do that throughout my career, both at this university and other universities too. I think it's incredibly important, and I'm privileged to be able to do that. I understand that. But what we've done with our staff, and our staff asked for this, our front of house reception staff have name badges, and on the name badge it has all of the different flags for the languages that they speak, so that students can see quite easily, oh, that's somebody from India and that's somebody from China. I might be able to speak in Mandarin or whatever language it might be, and that's worked quite well. One of our staff asked a few weeks ago whether we could order some mini pride badges to go on alongside the countries too, to show their identity. And I was like, yeah, get them ordered, get them in. So we're now doing that, and the staff that feel safe and okay to do that and want to do that, then they've got it on their name badge. And I think they're really proud of that too, which is really nice to see. Yeah.
Okay. Our last question is kind of a doozy. So we're going to end on a very long question that requires probably some additional thought. And this is for everyone. So what challenges or limitations do residential life professionals face in aligning with or navigating government policies related to LGBTQIA+ issues? And how do they work to overcome these obstacles to ensure the fullest support of the LGBTQIA+ college students in campus housing? Just a simple question as our last one.
If you want, I can get started on that one. I think we have the biggest challenges here in the region. I mean, to put it sort of in a nutshell, we're not there yet. And while there are many people and there are champions within our community who are working towards a more inclusive campus, there are many who are working against it. The gender policy that was released by the Vice Chancellor, there's been significant pushback. There's been significant pushback from lecturers, from on accepting certain views in the policy. And I think that is where we will continue to have the challenge. As I said before, the younger generation are ready. They, in the most part, they want this, And I think there's a level of acceptance of who you are and I see it here at the hall, while people may not be parading and showing off, they all know who is part of various communities and accept them for that, and they're not ostracized from the general hall community. However, that probably the halls are a safe space for them. This is their home, so it's safe here. The general campus community, maybe not so, or less so, and probably the wider national community, it's even more difficult. So I think for us, it's really about we need to challenge the system, and we need to talk more, and I think that's where we've fallen a bit short. The conversations need to be had. These are difficult conversations, and they will be hard conversations, and it will be quite confrontational, but they need to be had at this time. And I'm hoping over the next 5 or 6 years that does happen. I mean, there's a policy, there's a document, it's there. When are we going to do it? I mean, there's actually right now a campus group which has been formed across the campuses to look at the policy. It hasn't quite got going as yet. We'll see how it goes in the next few years.
I want to say, Kevin, that we have, although the UK is a very friendly place in terms of being LGBTQ, I agree with that. When we look academically and we look at universities and we look at maybe freedom of speech, freedom of academic speech, that's where we have problems at many UK universities. It's really challenging. I think sometimes practice versus research and academic output, there's a clash there sometimes, and we feel that all the time from the academics, where we're challenged actually on some of the things that we would see as maybe common sense and basic practice isn't reflected. And actually, yes, we should be challenging decisions academically, but sometimes that can open up a whole different discussion. But I still think that our biggest problem here is that because LSE is so diverse as a student body, and so is a lot of universities in the UK, that brings a lot of challenges. A high percentage of our students are Muslim students, a high percentage of Jewish students, and with that, religion, culture, upbringing, and countries that those students might be coming from brings a different perspective, and a perspective that isn't maybe the norm in the UK. And so a lot of our work is around educating students, but also just getting them to understand their differences and getting students to work with each other, understand each other. They might not agree with each other's life choices. They might not ever agree with each other's life choices. And we get that, but actually what we don't want is students to discriminate in any way. And that's where we'll come down a bit harder on students to and follow our processes and policies, which can be quite tough sometimes. And we will suspend and exclude students, and already have done, based on harassment and discrimination around LGBTQ rights and the law in the UK. But it's challenging. And the more we as universities become more and more diverse, which is what we want, those challenges will continue and grow too. And we have to be prepared for that. We have to be really prepared to accept and be challenged by our students. And they're paying a lot of money, to be here. So it's only fair.
I think in the US, there's, a wide range of challenges that are faced. It could be state by state. There's some, things also at the federal level that really do prepare for some challenges. And I think as housing professionals, thinking about what our individual contexts are in that environment, especially state by state, how that impacts in whether you are able to have policies blatant and out there and yes, this is exactly what we have, or are you having to be a little more, for lack of a better way of saying it, more subversive in knowing that you have a way to work with students that supports and values what you do, but if someone comes and questions, it's not a formal policy that's in there that goes against what the new law or what the governor may say you can or cannot do, because it's going to restrict funds coming into you. I definitely think that's a challenge. I think while some of those things might be around able to be addressed in terms of when you're thinking about new construction on your campuses, how are you reducing the number of community style bathrooms to be able to offer individual single stalls, so that way they are gender inclusive no matter where they're at, no matter who is living where, for student, staff, etc., guests to be able to access those spaces. But I also think there are some things that people don't necessarily connect with. Some of these legal things are around what often folks are referring to as drag bans here in the US. And some of our student organizations, some of our programs like promote or support things that have that. In fact, the Oku Hawaii Campus Live conference this past year, the case study was around a drag ban, and an RHA group planning an annual drag event. And what would you do now that the governor has proposed legislation that would make it illegal? And so thinking about how do we still promote, art and culture and that type of thing, because those programming aspects might not necessarily be the forefront of your mind of that could be illegal, but in some states, if that legislation moves forward, that all of a sudden becomes one of those legal things that as an advisor, we might have to advise a group around, like, how can we do this? What is the best way about doing it? We always want to support our students. They may say, absolutely, this is the best thing, but let's learn about the ramifications and all of that. So, I think, to a little bit lighthearted, but at the same time, Ali, if you know of anyone who can answer that question, they're gonna make lots of money, because it is so hard to address that and figure out, because there's so much complexity that goes in on how do we do that and do the best that we can by our students, because even what we might answer today may completely change tomorrow based on something that's introduced or something that has played out on the local or regional or national level.
Yeah, it's a very tough question. There's a lot of moving pieces for it. But but it sounds like you all are working really hard at your institutions to support students just in general, and they're very lucky to have you all there. So thank you all so, so much for spending time with us today. I'm looking at the time and we're getting really close to the end of our session, so figure it might be good to wrap up. Thank you again for the three of you for participating, sharing your experiences. As Abigail just said, very insightful conversation. Thanks to everyone for sharing. Truly, this was a really great opportunity to hear from folks all over and hear about some of the limitations, restrictions, and ways that folks are getting around some of those things. So I really appreciate all of the work that you all are putting in to support students. And yeah, thanks again for being here.
Thank you. Thanks, Ali, as well, for all the work you do with the LGBTQ network across QOI. It's really appreciated. Thank you.
James beat me to it. I want to again echo Allie's thanks to our panelists, and also thank Allie for her work today, and also thank the other members of the LGBTQIA plus network and the Global Initiative Network who did a lot of work in the background to make today happen. So thank you, everyone. Stay tuned to our YouTube channel. This video will be up in a couple of days. Appreciate it all.
And I threw, if anyone's interested, I threw my email address in the chat if folks have questions. I know we didn't get a chance for that, but if folks have anything, I welcome you to contact me as well via email.